Welcome to Advocacy in Action. I'm so pleased that today we're joined by Wendy Rogers. Wendy is the Community Outreach and Engagement Manager of the Lupus Foundation of America. Wendy, we're so pleased you can be with us today. You have such an important perspective to share as an individual living with lupus and also a highly effective research advocate. Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you right now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the need for lupus research, as well as my experience advocating for lupus research, and a little bit of why it's so critical to our community. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of me and how I've been personally impacted by lupus in my journey. I show you on the left where I was in 2000 when I was diagnosed with lupus. And that photo is actually after a 6-month stay in ICU fighting for my life. And below, here I am, 2020, actually at the summit, working for advocacy and research. My background is in biology and public health. I was formerly a science and STEM teacher. And now I actually work as the LFA Senior Manager for Community Outreach and Engagement in the Southern California area. So I'm so excited to talk about this and enlighten you guys about why it's so important to me to highlight research. Just a snapshot of me. The list is, listed here. There's so much more I could say, but to just give you a brief overview about what happened to me when I was diagnosed with lupus, I initially started out with joint pain, fatigue, and hair loss, which was followed by a paralysis episode one morning where I literally couldn't lift my head from the pillow. And this triggered me to seek medical care. When I got to my primary care doctor, we ended up kind of struggling, wondering what was wrong with me, because when I walked in, I had extremely high blood pressure and was actually misdiagnosed as a hypertension patient. As I noticed that medication wasn't working, my symptoms were getting worse. I was sent to a rheumatologist where I actually had even asked to be tested for lupus after doing some of my own personal research. And despite the fact that I did receive the proper diagnosis, I walked away with quite a lack of education and tools to, make the life adjustments I needed to manage lupus. And because of this, I ended up experiencing a 6-month hospital stay, in and out ICU, fighting for my life. And I've kind of listed some of the things that happened while going through that. I developed CNS lupus, which means that it had affected my central nervous system. I had 4 grand mal seizures and a stroke. I developed a blood disorder called TTP for short, which can be quite devastating to many individuals. I ended up having brain swelling. I had MRSA. I ended up having collapsed lungs. I lost my ability to walk. And more than anything, in this impact, I had kidney failure, which caused me to do 9 years of hemodialysis, because that's how critical my case was with the issues that I had. Fortunately, I'm able to sit here today and speak to you because I was able to receive the gift of life in a kidney transplant 11 years ago. So I kind of do this in honor of my donor and explain that, and show that life can go on despite having a disease like this. Next slide. So after looking at my case, what I really want to hone in on when we consider advocacy and research is the fact that lupus is the type of disease that can cause a tremendous burden on individuals. I've listed on the left some of the overviews of who's affected by lupus. But just for a moment, I just want to kind of go through this list that's created by the Lupus Foundation of America on how lupus can negatively impact a person's life. Relationships, it's a hard discussion to have, but in many cases, patients aren't understood because we don't often look sick. Looking at me, you would never know that I had to do 9 years of dialysis, or I'm sitting here with a kidney transplant. because it's often considered a look good, feel bad disease. So people are often categorized as lazy. Their symptoms come and go, so they're not always seen as dependable. On the daily responsibility aspect, some days you feel great, some days you can't brush your teeth, some days you can't get out of bed. And so you're up and down. So sometimes holding on and doing those daily responsibilities can be difficult. Lupus impacts people financially. This is quite an expensive condition to have because, as I get into a little bit more, it can affect any organ system of the body. A lot of people need customized care. They need a lot of the ologists, cardiologists, hematologists, and so it can be quite pricey. And you can see listed here the average annual direct and indirect cost of people with lupus. Another thing is that lupus can cause 1 in 4 individuals to either be temporarily or permanently disabled by the disease. This in itself is quite a life-changing effect and is often difficult for individuals to adjust as they consider where they fit in society and their own life. And as far as managing and taking care of themselves, only 31% of adults that have lupus are employed. So I'm in that 31% and very fortunate, but you can see there's a huge loss when you have this disease. When we consider who is impacted by lupus, we have an approximation of 1.5 million people in the US. Looking at that, 90% are women, usually in childbearing ages that span many ages and age brackets. But I also want to iterate that lupus can infect anybody. It's the type of disease that's really broad, but when you pinpoint in, these are the people you often see. 3 out of 5 are women of color. So in the minority community, you'll see that it can be something that is quite impactful. Minorities often experience the symptoms of lupus earlier and more severely when compared by Caucasians, according to studies. Next slide. All right, so just a rundown of reasons why lupus research is so critical and so necessary for our community. The Lupus Foundation of America has actually coined the name of this disease, the cruel mystery. And that's because when you look at people across the board, there's not a cookie cutter explanation to this. It's not a cookie cutter pattern that you'll see. Lupus is quite unpredictable and each person is affected differently. I'm just one story, even though someone else who has lupus might be affected. The way and the areas of manifestations and the severity of their experience can be quite different from mine. And so we often like to say we're like snowflakes, because even though there's a common pool of symptoms, the way people experience their journey will be quite different. Lupus also can range from mild to severe. There's some people that'll go their whole lifetime and be okay, where some people like me have had a severe impact and need more critical care. One of the other things that I want to hone in on is the fact when we look at research, lupus does not have a single diagnostic tool. We use the ANA test to help identify lupus, but in most cases, people with lupus have to, in a sense, build their case. They have a collection of, weird instances like my hair fell out, or I notice I'm having joint pain. And it takes time to build a case to bring to a doctor or medical providers to say, hey, let's consider that this may be the case. Another big issue about lupus and why it's such a critical need is the fact that in treating people with lupus, they often have to use medications that are from different specialty areas or disciplines of medicine. For example, in my case, I have actually taken some of the transplant medications for lupus prior to this, surgery. And above anything, as I've highlighted in bold black letters, it took more than 50 years before the first ever lupus drug was approved. So that in itself, to me, makes this need extremely vital and critical. So research is definitely needed. Lupus has no cure, and so we do need ongoing research to meet people where they are. Next slide. So I love this part. For me, advocacy has been just an empowering experience. It gave me a sense of purpose. I became a volunteer with the Lupus Foundation of America 15 years ago. And this was one of the aspects that has really uplifted me and made me feel fulfilled in my journey with lupus. And not only myself, but has allowed me to help others. The National Lupus Summit is something that is now offered each year. This was the last picture we had before the pandemic. So you could see us all happy and together, but we still carried that on. This is an event that's actually the nation's largest lupus advocacy event. We are able to gather and learn from experts and receive information about the latest lupus research that's going on. We're taught to advocate for not only ourselves, but the entire community. The foundation sets up meetings for us to meet with our congressional leaders, which we've had the ability to build amazing relationships with and keep in touch with as it relates to things we need. But most importantly, we have been able to ask for the vital funding that we need to carry on this work of research and advancements in science for lupus. Next slide. I wanted to highlight some of our wins here. These were our asks that we had at our last summit. And I just have to take a moment and say, when I began advocating, I did my first Hill visit in 2006 to ask my congressional leaders to support lupus. I had nowhere near the type of list that's here. The ask was something along the lines of, hey, I'm Wendy, I'm living with lupus, and this is a disease that's quite devastating, and it needs to be on the level of funding that is equivalent to other diseases because it's just that necessary. And people lose their lives, people can't live a normal life. And so, hey, could you give us some attention in a sense? And here we are in 2020, and there are 4 different agencies that are doing lupus research. And that in itself is such an honor and such validation that those Hill visits that I've sacrificed to do and took the time to meet with congressional officials make a difference. So I just wanted to share that advocacy for me has been something that I've seen as a key in changing the course of this disease and the quality of life for others. So the wins that we've had this year, we now have $10 million for the National Lupus Patient Registry, which I'll share a little bit more about in the next coming slide. At the CDC, we have $2 million for the lupus program at the Office of Minority Health, which you already know is important because of who can be impacted by lupus. We have $47 billion awarded for the National Institutes of Health, and this has been an increase of more than $5 billion for us. And then finally, we have $10 million for our research program at the Department of Defense. So as you can see, advocacy truly does make an impact. Next slide. Now, I want to touch a little bit about, the patient perspective when we look at clinical trials. And I know anybody in the field of research or medicine knows that it's difficult for patients to be involved. I wanted to highlight a few projects and research studies that the Lupus Foundation of America that are ongoing. But I wanted to really look at the top 3 to hone in why this has been important to me and some of the advances that we're making in the course of research. We're now working for advancements in the area of childhood lupus. When we think about the broad spectrum, children don't always come to mind, but there is a form of lupus that affects pediatric patients. And what's really sad about that is when children are affected, it can be quite devastating. One of the key impacts that children will face with lupus is kidney failure. And think about living with lupus as a kid. I was formerly a teacher, and it really causes kids to struggle with school attendance and just living a kid life and doing things that children should do. Our other study that I'm so excited about this one is the mesenchymal stem cell research. And this has been, for so many of us, an exciting new exploration that we're really, really cheering on to see that it's a new option for us to consider treatment. And then we're making some great strides. There's about 3 companies right now that have some promising work in their clinical trial studies on lupus nephritis, which is something near and dear to my heart, as you could see in the opening of how my life was impacted for many years just because my kidneys were affected by lupus. And then I've listed some other important, aspects of our studies. One of the things I really want to hone in right now before I move on about clinical studies is I want to remind researchers or anyone in the field of research, and I am honing in on lupus research, but just period, is that as a patient, it's really, really important to have patients part of the entire process of drug development. We need you. This is actually my friend on this picture. It's not some stock photo. And I know her story about the time she actually spends in a day or a night making her medicine tray, which I do as well. And so we need these medications, but we also need them to be effective for us. And so being part of the entire drug development is really necessary, and having our voice present. We need to be present when you're advocating for the funding that makes all of this stuff possible. And also, we need to be present in the clinical trials. As an African-American person, I know that it's very difficult, and a lot of people are fearful about participating in clinical trials, but it's really, really important to have a diverse population when you look at the medications. I've dealt with that even myself, where when medication treatments were considered, there were some things that were standard that I couldn't take. And I know that is something that, seems simple, but it's important when you have something critical like, kidney failure. So having patients at the table, please invite them. They're more than just your participant. They need to be your partner in this study. Okay, next slide. So before I wrap up, I do want to highlight some of the ways that people can support lupus research through the Lupus Foundation of America. Of course, you can use our online tools listed here. You could search for a clinical trial. You can join the Partners Network, and they're described here. You can also visit lupus.org to learn more about this. But one of the key things I want to highlight in all of these options is the ability to enroll in our lupus registry. This has been a platform that is critical to the ongoing process of researching and coming up with treatments in the science world as we think about how to help individuals impacted by lupus. So we're developing, or the organization is developing, a new platform that will be rolling out soon. And this is going to be something available for the entire research community to utilize. And so you can learn more about that. So stay tuned. If you want to learn more, visit our site. You can contact me as well. But what I want to definitely highlight is the uniqueness of this is lupus patients actually use this registry to share how lupus is impacting their life on a day-to-day basis. So you learn directly from the patient the struggles, the challenges, the needs for treatments, right from the horse's mouth about what they need to live a better life with this disease. So in turn, basically this registry helps everyone across the board. It helps the physician, it helps pharma agencies and the whole drug industry. It's great for researchers to use, and it even is beneficial for our government. But more importantly, it's an ultimate win for the lupus patient around the board. It's ultimately something that's going to help us see a future with better treatments. Next slide. Here are a few other ways to support research. You can definitely learn about how to participate. We really encourage patients to participate. I'm actually participating in a clinical trial myself right now, and I've done several along the way. And so being someone that could definitely, encourage others to participate is really important, and having the information to know the benefits of participating in a trial is really, really important. You can check out our featured studies. I've listed some of them already. And you can also participate in our investigator-initiated studies. So we offer quite a variety of ways to support our work when it comes to advancing treatments. Next slide. So basically, that's in essence, my perspective on advocacy and lupus, but I'm sitting here as living proof that advocacy has worked, and I've seen the change over the course of my life, the last 20 years, and all of the efforts, and I just cannot thank you guys enough. I want to take the time for anybody who is working in research anywhere to think about, if you don't have a face to put to, you could put mine, because those advancements make it possible for even simple moments like this for me to have the ability to sit here as a healthy individual and give back to a community that I dearly, truly love and am passionate about. So advocacy does work, and I encourage you guys to keep up the great work as you consider moving on. You can contact me here, and if I'm not the right person, I'll be happy to move you on to who can help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome.
What a wonderful, bravo, bravo, wonderful presentation. Your presence, the content really just epitomizes how powerful patient advocacy can be in research. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So before we move into our final session for the day, I want to take one more moment to recognize our sponsors. Continued thanks to our lead sponsor, Pfizer. Thanks to our panel sponsors, AvaMed, Bristol Myers Squibb, Elsevier, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Pharma, Regeneron, Sanofi, and UCB. Thank you also to our fireside chat sponsors, Bio and Pecori, our advocacy and action sponsor, Eli Lilly and Company, our daily host for day one, Takeda Pharmaceutical Company, our Flash Talks competition sponsor, ASI, don't miss that tomorrow, and our 20 Voices, 3 Minutes, 1 Question sponsors, the American Society for Microbiology, the Association of Clinical Research Organizations, Amgen, Colgate, and the Medical Device Manufacturers Association. I am pleased to introduce our next session, a Science on the Front Lines conversation with NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins and Dr. Michael Dolston, the Chief Scientific Officer and President of Worldwide Research, Development, and Medical at Pfizer, and a Research America board member. Following this important Science from the Front Lines conversation, please join us at 4:10 Eastern Time for a compelling panel discussion called Then, Now, Imagine, Path to Progress Against Diabetes. This panel will be moderated by Derek Rapp, Managing Director, Rivervest Venture Partners, and a Research America board member. Panelists include Congressman Tom Reed, Dr. Griffin Rogers, the Director of the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases at NIH, Christina Alici, Business and Politics Correspondent at CNN, and Dr. Carol Levy, Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of the Diabetes Center and Type 1 Diabetes Clinical Research at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. See you back in the auditorium. Thank you.